Thank you, Catherine Corless. The excavation of the Tuam site, the identification of victims and the dignified burial of remains will happen only because of the work of Catherine Corless, survivor groups, campaigners and their relatives and their allies. Any attempt to intervene at Tuam and other locations has been resisted by governments and the state for decades. A rotten partnership between the Irish state and the Roman Catholic Church perpetuated these abuses and actively opposed any form of accountability and justice. The Tuam Mother and Baby Home Alliance were forced to protest again outside the Dáil today due to their disgraceful treatment by the minister. Today they reiterated their call for the role of the coroner as prescribed in law to hold an inquest to establish the cause of death in compliance with international law. They are highlighting how the Act intentionally does not meet international human rights standards. It only applies in circumstances of inappropriate burial, but not in cases of unnatural or unexplained deaths in these institutions. Despite pleas from survivors and human rights experts and amendments from myself and others, the ministers created a law that would limit the number of possible interventions and the scale of any intervention. Minister, you told me that this Act should not cover examinations based on unnatural deaths, as that is the responsibility of the coroners and An Garda Síochána, when you know well that this has not happened and that it will not happen. Coroners still have not been directed to investigate known mass graves by this and previous governments. It was only public and international pressure at the horror of Tuam that forced the then Fine Gael government to act. The uncovering of the truth, no matter how uncomfortable, must happen. The long history of abuse, forced incarceration, family separation, illegal adoptions and unnatural deaths needs to be fully investigated. We need a survivor-led transitional justice process. Unfortunately, this government's treatment of survivors and the disregard for their preferences offers little hope for the justice that they seek and that they deserve. The Tuam Mother and Baby Home Alliance also protested about other issues today. Minister, they cite your recent unilateral decision to, and I quote them directly, to deny our members and those who provided testimonies to the Confidential Committee the opportunity to have those testimonies reviewed by an independent expert with a human rights background, as you previously promised. And it is standard practice with this government. The survivors found this out by reading the Examiner, the work of Elaine Loughlin, not from the Minister or the Department. It is utterly disgraceful. There is a clear pattern here. Any progress comes after soul-draining campaigning from a dedicated group of people and massive public outcry. When government eventually reacts, it always reacts just enough to get a good headline, to get enough to satisfy public attention until the news cycle moves on. Today is another example of this. The headlines will look for the minister, but what about the survivor and family protests? What about the failure to meet human rights standards? What about the mass graves that will never be investigated unless something changes? Our shameful history of state and church abuse, when mass incarceration of young mothers, children, people experiencing mental health conditions and disabled people has left many locations of known and suspected burials. Academics and activists have charted the scale of unnatural deaths in mother and baby homes, county homes, industrial schools, psychiatric hospitals and in other institutions. What about these victims and their relatives? Where is their justice? I quickly came to the conclusion in the pre-legislative scrutiny stage of this Act that it was designed to solely intervene in Tuam. While this is essential and it is welcome, there are many other sites across the country that also require methodical and respectful excavation. The Act is intentionally filled with barrier after barrier to prevent it being applied to any other location. The state does not want this issue properly examined. There is an aversion to giving survivors their information, to allowing them to tell their stories, to investigate our shameful past. The government is committed to do just enough, barely enough, creating very limited prospects for justice. If you've convinced yourself that you're doing the right thing, let me inform you that you're not. Today is, of course, an emotional and a welcome day for the survivors of Tuam and the many people who know or hope that their loved ones are buried there. But it is also a grim reminder to many others that their loved ones buried in other sites will never get justice.